welcome back to Women Making Moves, where we celebrate the moves that women are making. My name is Amy Pons. I'm a Master Certified Life Coach and an energy healer. I'm joined today with Mariam Araji. Mariam is a co-production lead and domestic violence advocate. Her journey is rooted in a deep commitment to social justice and championing women's rights. With a master's degree in gender violence and conflict, she brings over 8 years of dedicated experience in aiding victims of trafficking, refugees, and individuals impacted by domestic violence, among other vulnerable groups. Having lived in Iraq and observed the realities of war, displacement, and the refugee crisis, she's witnessed firsthand the profound impact of violence and abuse. This experience has shaped her life's mission to empower women. She believes that empowerment is the cornerstone of protection in war-torn environments, providing support to the vulnerable, whether it's aiding victims of domestic abuse or helping them understand and access their rights, can profoundly affect not only individuals but also the broader community, fostering societal and policy changes for the better. As a woman and a feminist activist, her experience in conflict zones has taught her the transformative power of empowerment, and it's about making a significant difference, not just individual lives, but in our society as a whole. Mariam, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
I really resonate with what you said about what I'm reading as the ripple effect of how empowering ourselves, for me, it's empowering myself to then be able to stand in my light, and for other women specifically to see that and feel my amazing light, to be able to shine their amazing light, and the ripple effect that it has.
Yeah, it's very, very important. I think it all starts within ourselves and how we perceive things around us. And for me, it started with me, with my mother. I've been raised by a single mother in Iraq, and that was very, very difficult. It was before 2003. It's a very tribal society, very hard for any woman to stand for herself. And my mom to have that decision to get divorced, get out of a relationship she wasn't happy with, and raise me and my brother in Iraq. And then the war happened in 2003. And to be honest, all my life in Iraq, it was just like either war or something has to do with the war. So it was very, very difficult. And then she moved us around. I moved from Iraq to Syria for a few years, and from Syria to Lebanon, and then back to Iraq. And my mom was a real model for me. And that's how I learned to look for her, to look up for her, and see how society in the Middle East and in Iraq perceived us as women and how difficult it is. And I always wanted to do something, to give back, because I believe in my time, it was easier for me. It was easier for other women. And it all started, I got a scholarship to do an exchange program in America for women's leadership skills. And I had no idea that I would go down this path in my life. I was studying international studies, has nothing to do with it. But I went there, and during that program, I stayed for a month and a half in the US. And every week I have to do volunteer in a shelter, in a women's shelter for domestic abuse. We have no concept of that in Iraq. And that was very interesting to me. We don't have shelters for women. We don't have it. And women who go through domestic abuse, they go to prison because it's the safest place, and that is their shelter. So it is very traumatic. But when I went there and I volunteered, it was amazing. The service is amazing. Women, they've been able to bring their children with. They offered everything. And I spoke to many of them. And every week I used to go there. And when I went back, I was like, you know what? That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. I want to bring in my mom's struggle, other women's struggle. Luckily, my mom was educated and she could. Some other women in Iraq, they couldn't. There is no services for us. And I went back then, 2014, ISIS took over a lot of parts of Iraq and Syria. And I had the opportunity. I went for a job interview, and I was like, my English was good, so they enjoyed that. As an Iraqi, they wanted to empower women and hire Iraqis who speak good English. So I went, and I was very young. And I remember my manager said, how would you manage in camps? I wanted to work in camps. And I was like, my dream is just to be there. I want to see how it is. And I want to be the voice of them. I am from them. I'm from this community. And she was like, you can't manage. It's very demanding. It's mainly men dominated, and all of them are older than me. I said, okay, fine. Don't pay me. Just get me as a volunteer. I'll do it for a month and see how it goes. And so I just, okay, fine. And then I heard back and she's like, you know what? We have a different thing. It's a joint project between Syrian refugees in Iraq and Palestine. So let's start with that. And you go to the camps, you see women, you work with women. And it's all women who have been through violence. So I was like, okay, fine. And from then I spent 2 years in camps with refugees, Syrian refugees and Iraqi displaced people.
So these are refugee camps?
No, there were Syrian refugee camps. And later on, when ISIS took over 3 cities in Iraq, we start having, I think it was around 2016, 17, when we had around 3 million displaced Iraqi internally displaced people.
So displacement camps.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that to start with. When you say that Iraqi women didn't have shelters, so there was no place for them to go.
Yeah.
So what would they do in a domestic violence situation?
It's very, very sad. For instance, if she has a problem, and that is something astonishing to me, that she goes first to her parents, and most parents will say, oh, work it out, go back to your house. She goes back to her house. And then it gets even more and more physical. She goes to the police. If you come to the laws, there are laws. In the Constitution, there is a lot of laws. If it comes to reality, it's not implemented. The police, sometimes they actually abuse. And I think it was in 2000, during COVID time, 2020, sorry. I worked in different cities in Iraq. And so usually all the international NGOs that come to Iraq, they focus on displacement or refugees. They don't work with the host communities. But I always find it interesting to work with the host communities. There was one girl, she was 16 years old. She's raped by her dad, 4 times by her dad. She went to the hospital. They write the report, but they're so scared. They're so scared that her family, that will come after them, they can't hand it in. She had enough. She went to the police to report the incident. And the police said to her, if you don't go, I will be the next one. That is the severity of it. And it's not something to joke with. It's someone's life. Well, first, she's a child. 16 years old is a child. If the first point of contact, like, usually is to call the police, and they're meant to protect you, but they're actually abusing you, where do you go from there? And shelter, there's no such a thing. A shelter, I worked, and that was one cause why I left that job when I was doing human trafficking. It was too much for me. It conflicted with my principles that I can't do it. The shelter they had for these women, and they were from different places. They were trafficked to Iraq, sex slaves to ISIS, some of them after their liberation. Some of them were Iraqis, a lot of labor that they came to Iraq and they've been abused there from Africa, Philippines, different places. I had one case that I worked with. She was the only Iraqi case I had. And I worked with her and I went to see her. It was a prison. It was an actual prison. But they have a small space for women who are victims. It was horrible. Being in a prison, the idea of being in prison for doing absolutely nothing, for being a victim, it's wrong. And it was just very bizarre that their families can come. Anyone can come. Where is the protection?
And it sounds like you're saying it's because women in those regions are not deemed as humans.
Yeah, I think they look at us down. They look at us
Right.
as less as men. And I've learned that I was to be a very quiet person, very shy. I went to American schools. I studied with different than regulars. So I learned in my school that you have to speak. And I remember that you have to speak up. You have to do presentation. You have to make your voice heard. And when I came to reality and to work, they wouldn't let me speak. They would not let me speak just because I'm a female and I'm Iraqi. If it's a different nationality, if a white woman comes, she might have similar struggles, but less than being an Iraqi.
So it's women are less than. So when you speak about these women that had a small space in a prison, what does their life look like as it unfolds?
So these ones, they were trafficked. If they were not Iraqis, they will just be sent home, back to their homes. If Iraqis, they don't know what to do with them. And that's a huge problem that we have in Iraq. The government does not have the capacity, that does not have the, I don't know, facilities to handle all of this. We have trafficked people, we have victims of domestic abuse, we have victims who are being forced to marry to ISIS members, and after their liberation, they have absolutely no right. It's easier for the government to say, you know what, you've married these people, you have children from them, we can't deal with you. They strip them of their IDs. There's no support. They can't even go to hospitals, and they put them in camps. So the government lacks that foundation. And understand, we have war, we had so many wars, but you can't solve a problem by creating another problem for them.
So what is the state of the union right now? What kinds of things are you working on, and what kinds of things should we be thinking about as it relates to supporting from afar? How can we band together, Mariam?
Right now, I'm studying a course to qualify for independent domestic violence advocate, which gives me the opportunity to support women independently, even from far, not being in contact with them. That is one thing. The other thing is there is a lot of small local organizations that are forming in Iraq by women. And as a way, I think that we can support from abroad is to start maybe fund these small NGOs, design projects for them, because they don't have the capacity to write project proposals, the activities. Even myself now, because I'm settled in England, now I start to learn about mental health. And now I'm finding out about my traumas that I have went through. They don't. And that is, I think, if we bring the attention, it's great to support big causes like international organizations and to build their capacity, but it's also good as everyone who's abroad to work with these women in Iraq, and it's easy to get to them.
You know, something that really resonates with what you said, and certainly the degrees of which this happens will, of course, vary between the US and what you're sharing, what happens in Iraq when women go to the police. A lot of times, in my experience, is far-reaching as well, not from a professional space, but I have a lot of experience with domestic violence from my younger years. And also, when you say there's no shelters, there were no shelters around you. Literally, where I am in the northern Chicago suburbs, within a half hour, there's probably 10, around, and that's still not enough, meaning the beds are, and so I'm constantly working with the different shelters to say, what can we do? What do we need? And what they've started to do is they're working on bigger capital projects to expand their campuses, because after pandemic, especially, domestic violence shot through the roof because everyone was contained in a space with their abuser. So beyond that, what they sometimes do, they'll work with hotels so that they can have somewhere for the victims to go to, the survivors, so they can at least get out. But as you probably know, the statistics are very high that they return to the abuser, because that is safety, that's familiarity, that's all they know. And in large part, there's usually a child or a pet involved, where if you get an order of protection, it's just working with the system as well, because I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure you know this, especially in your studies, is that over 70% of domestic violence victims will be killed by their abuser. The order of protection and the police, while they do get involved, it's still like they won't even show up to a domestic violence situation unless someone's been actively attacked and they're really hurt. The preventative, the proactive, is seemingly where it's really lacking, at least here in the US.
It's very similar to the UK. I work as domestic violence advocate. So in the UK, and there's a lot of shelters, the police will be there for you if someone needs support. There's hotels if they don't have a place. They call it here refuge in the UK. So if you don't have a place, they will put her in a hotel. The issue that I've seen here is the same mentality. So if I work with Black and minoritized women, with Arab and Asian communities, for instance, that I work with very closely here in the UK, they do not understand what domestic abuse is. The chances for them to actually call the police and get out is very less. I think I've been doing this for the last 2.5 years here in the UK. I only had 3 Arab women that I've supported. And I know there's so many, all of them, it's either the language that comes within the spouse. So most of them, they come on spouse visa, and that's where the perpetrators use it. You know what? We're going to cancel your visa. You're not able to see your children. She doesn't speak very good English. She can't know if that's actually true or not. She doesn't know where to go. There's a lot of financial control because in these communities, men are supposed to provide and women are supposed to stay home. It doesn't matter if they're in the UK or if they're back home. I remember last year I was supporting a woman. She came to my office and she had blue eyes and had bruises on her face. And I said, what happened? It's like, oh, it's nothing. I said, it's not nothing. Your eyes is blue. He's punched you. He said, oh, this is just a slap. I said, that's abuse. A slap is abuse. You don't have to be bedridden. For these communities, you actually have to be in the hospital, bedridden. That's when he's abused you. Mm-hmm. If he swears at you, if he swears at her, if he financially abuses her, emotionally, physically, whatever, until she's in bed, that's not abuse. So there's a lack of awareness, even though there are a lot of services. Homelessness here in the UK, for instance, with these communities, it's different. You would rarely see an Arab woman or an Asian woman who suffer from domestic abuse in the street. They experience it differently. They'd be self-serving. They'd be exposed to further abuse by other relatives or family members that they move in with, because she would rather stay with him or with anyone else than being in the street. Mm-hmm. And get more abused and more abused.
You brought up about mental health and that so many different forms of abuse. Some of the maybe lesser known or the less obvious is, of course, the financial abuse, the psychological abuse. And that's something that psychological safety is my entire world, meaning I created my business a year ago to create psychological safety, find that psychological safety for each unique individual in my realm. And I've joined a national team in the US to drive a piece of legislation forward that is the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. In the workplace specifically, that psychological abuse is running rampant because you can't see or touch it or hear it. It's like it's something that's going so under the radar. And as you can imagine, that's gaining momentum. And if it's gone under the radar in the workplace, psychological abuse in a private setting, in a personal setting, what's interesting is what's coming to light is so many people, not just in the workplace, but we're on a big campaign to help people understand, especially in the workplace, what psychological abuse looks like, which is undermining, gaslighting, to just name a couple. Again, when you get into a personal setting, how many people do we both know that is enduring psychological abuse on some level in a personal relationship?
Yeah.
And where do you even start with that? It feels like it's getting harder and harder to both help people understand what abuse really is on all levels, and then also what action could they take? Because again, we know that the orders of protection and intervening from the law isn't even sometimes effective in a blatant physical abuse case. So what about all these other abuses?
I personally believe physical abuse is the easiest type to recover from. Psychological, emotional abuse is very hard to recover from. It could take years. It might take a lifetime to recover from. How a person feels, how broken they feel inside, how their confidence gets broken, their trust. And I see this on a daily basis with the women that I support. They don't trust anything. They don't have confidence. I know they're very smart. They know that. They know they're capable. They know they're smart, but the confidence is all gone. They're doubtful of what they do. And again, it's very hard if they go to the police and say, of being emotionally abused or psychologically abused. How do you prove it?
And there's no law in place that says you can't emotionally or psychologically abuse someone.
No, I think it's very hard for women to say, I am emotionally abused or psychologically, or even financially, maybe it's easier to say that. But to say I'm mentally being abused is not easy because it takes a lot of courage. It comes again with the perpetrator portraying, oh, it's your fault, the victim blaming, especially if she's got mental health issues, your mental health issues that you are imagining these things. It's not happening. And finally, to get the courage, and if she has children, to get out and to go and say, okay, I need support, and go to the police. There's no evidence of that. Where does she go with it? And that is, again, The system also, even in the UK, as much as good, as amazing compared to other parts of the world, especially where I come from, it still lacks a lot of things. It lacks the support for women to actually acknowledge if someone has gone through domestic violence and they've gone through all this abuse, they can't go through the same processes as a different person. There is not much of a trauma-informed approach with dealing with victims of domestic abuse, the children. And I always tell my service users that I support, even if you think it's the worst place you're in right now, and your children, they can't see their fathers or whatever, you've done the best for them. It's a cycle. If you don't break it, your children most likely to either be abusers or be abused.
Right. Right. It's a never-ending cycle of people perpetuating the only thing that they've learned and the only way that they've learned how to do life.
Yeah.
Where it gets so dangerous. I mean, all forms of abuse are so dangerous. And to your point, when it goes to the place of emotional, psychological abuse, where you're questioning who you are, you actually have no idea at your core who you are, what your voice sounds like, what you want this life to be, not knowing at any idea who you are makes it even harder to even tell anyone or even realize it yourself of what you're enduring or what you're experiencing.
Yeah, 100%. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. So is there any sort of silver lining or anything that's happening? And if there's not, I get it. But is there anything that you're seeing as a glimmer in the industry and the work that you do toward advocating for war-torn conflict, abuse, specifically with women? Is there something you look toward to reassure you that things are moving?
I think yes. And I'm one myself and even my close friends, even that I'm in the UK, I still have passion, and I think I even have plans to go back and implement what I learned or something new. And it's same with other women that I know currently in Iraq. And I would say 5 years ago, you wouldn't see many women as business owners or starting their own businesses. And that takes a lot of courage to actually go out of the house and just do something. And as much as I love to see it in the capital, Baghdad, but it's easier to do it in Baghdad, but I'd like to see it in some cities like Najaf, for instance. There's so many women from Najaf. It's a very, very conservative community where you have to cover. You can't get into the city without covering fully yourself. Women who have been very successful and not in any business, no, in technology, in IT, they run their own companies, even small. It's fine. It's okay. They educate, and now I see even more women my age and younger. They are talking a lot about issues of violence, about speaking up to yourself, about awareness. Also, something is very new. It's very new. Mental health is very new in Iraq, and it's my goal to go and work there. Even if I can go 1 month a year, it's good. And I always believe is to start with a family and then go out with friends, and then more and more and more. Mental health now, I've noticed in the last year, is been shifted. That before we did not have therapists. It does not exist. If you need any kind of support, you're crazy, you go to the mental health hospital. Depression, anxiety. Given that we come from a war, we have so much traumas we need to do. But now I see even in small circles, women are starting to do that, and they do it online, which is amazing. So I think there is always hope.
Okay, thank you for that. It's really easy, especially when you're in an activism role, at least from my standpoint. This is how I feel. Some days I can get really deep into all that is still such a problem, where humans are exerting power over humans, and that has become the norm. Some days I can get really bogged down. So I appreciate you bringing some of those glimmers of light. We all have them. You and I are out here, like you and I are the lights, just finding more lights. In my experience has been the way where I remain fueled toward what we're working toward. You've given me a lot of great information today that I didn't know of. And, in the US, which is far from the gold standard. It hasn't been for a long time, in my opinion. Not that it's your job to educate us being as white women in the US, not that it's your job to educate us on the world affairs or like what's going on, but I don't think everyone knows the reality of what it was like for you.
I really thank you for bringing this up. I think because you're very far away, not yourself, but many, many women, they're very far away from us. There is a huge misconception of how Arabs and Iraqis are. Well, I speak for Iraqis, at least for myself. We've always perceived as we are backward community. We don't have rights. Sometimes I've been asked, do you really drive a car in Iraq? Yes, we do drive cars. Some of us are very educated. So I think is how the media portrays men and women, either terrorists, violence. I've never seen anywhere where they show the good part of my country, at least. I've also seen, I think, a book, and it shows the Middle East as there's horses and carriages, and that's not the reality. That's not what we are. So I think maybe reaching out to people, go visit. It's a safe place. Go visit and talk to people. We love foreigners. We love to introduce them to our traditions, our culture, and do not really depend on media or what it's written or the report that comes. It is only specific areas maybe. And I think Iraq is way more than the war and the oil that we have. And that's all the conflict that is happening there. We have a lot of culture. We're very diverse. I can't speak for everyone myself, that we have Arabs, we have Kurds, we have Muslims, we have Christian, Yazidis. Everyone has their own culture. So I think reach out to them. Don't learn it from TV or media, and don't learn it from others. Speak to them. There's a lot of influencers. There are a lot of influencers, not as in fashion, as not. I don't believe they show the most of what it is, but there's many women who actually, they talk about our issues on daily basis, and they show the different face, I would say, or of Iraqi women.
That's incredible. That starts today. That starts now. So typically this is where I would ask, like, where can we find you? Meaning, where can we find your work? If someone wants to connect with you more or learn more about you, what you do, where would that be? Where would you point people?
I would say LinkedIn, because the type of work I do, I can't go on social media and talk about it. Not that place.
Right.
LinkedIn is the best place to find out.
Any closing remarks as we start to wind down?
I work in domestic violence. I come from a war country. Violence is just around us. And I would encourage everyone to please break the cycle. It is just that first step that you can take. It's the hardest step. Just get out, break the cycle, and there is support everywhere for you. That's what I would encourage everyone who's going through difficult times, going through abuse. Take the first step.
Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you very much.